Now let's finish the second part of chapter 9. We're looking at Annemarie going in now to the wake of her great Aunt Bertie. The gleaming wooden casket rested on supports in the center of the living room and was surrounded by the fragile, papery flowers that Annemarie and Ellen had picked that afternoon. Lighted candles stood on holders on the table and cast a soft, flickering light. The hearse had gone, and the solemn-faced men who had carried the casket indoors had gone with it, after speaking quietly to Uncle Henrik. Kirsty had gone to bed reluctantly, complaining that she wanted to stay up with the others, that she was grown up enough, that she had never before seen a dead person in a closed-up box, and that it wasn't fair. But Mama had been firm, and finally Kirsty, sulking, had trudged upstairs with her dolls under one arm and the kitten under the other. Ellen was silent and had a sad expression. "I'm so sorry your Aunt Bertie died," Annemarie heard her say to Mama, who smiled sadly and thanked her. Annemarie had listened and said nothing. So now I too am lying, she thought, and to my very best friend. I could tell Ellen that it isn't true, that there's no great Aunt Bertie. I could take her aside and whisper the secret to her so that she wouldn't have to feel sad. But she didn't. She understood that she was protecting Ellen, the way her mother had protected her. Although she didn't understand what was happening, or why the casket was there, or who in truth was in it, she knew that it was better, safer, for Ellen to believe in great Aunt Bertie. So she said nothing. Other people came as the night sky grew darker. A man and a woman, both of them dressed in dark clothing, the woman carrying a sleeping baby, appeared at the door, and Uncle Henrik gestured them inside. They nodded to Mama and to the girls. They went, following Uncle Henrik, to the living room and sat down quietly. "Friends of great Aunt Bertie," Mama said quietly, in response to Annemarie's questioning look. Annemarie knew that Mama was lying again, and she could see that Mama understood that she knew. They looked at each other for a long time and said nothing. In that moment, with that look, they became equals. From the living room, the sound of a sleepy baby's brief wail. Annemarie glanced through the door and saw a woman open her blouse and begin to nurse the infant, who quieted. Another man arrived, an old man, bearded. Quietly, he went to the living room and sat down, saying nothing to the others, who only glanced at him. The young woman lifted her baby's blanket, covering its face in her own breast. The old man bent his head forward and closed his eyes, as if he were praying. His mouth moved silently, forming words that no one could hear. Annemarie stood in the doorway, watching the mourners as they sat in the candlelit room. Then she turned back to the kitchen and began to help Ellen and Mama as they prepared food. In Copenhagen, she remembered when Lisa died. Friends had come to their apartment every evening. All of them had brought food so that Mama wouldn't need to cook. Why hadn't these people brought food? Why didn't they talk? In Copenhagen, even though the talk was sad, people spoke softly to one another and to Mama and Papa. They had talked about Lisa, remembering happier times. Thinking about it as she sliced the cheese in the kitchen, Annemarie realized that these people had nothing to talk about. They couldn't speak of happier times with great Aunt Bertie when there had never been a great Aunt Bertie at all. Uncle Henrik came into the kitchen. He glanced at his watch and then at Mama. "It's getting late," he said. "I should go to the boat." He looked worried. He blew out the candle so that there would be no light at all, and opened the door. He stared beyond the gnarled apple tree into the darkness. "Good. Here they come," he said in a low, relieved voice. "Ellen, come with me." Ellen looked questioningly towards Mama, who nodded. "Go with Henrik," she said. Annemarie watched, still holding the wedge of firm cheese in her hand, as Ellen followed Uncle Henrik into the yard. She could hear a sharp, low cry from Ellen, and then the sound of voices speaking softly. In a moment, Uncle Henrik returned. Behind him was Peter Nielsen. Tonight, Peter went first to Mama and hugged her. Then he hugged Annemarie and kissed her on the cheek, but he said nothing. There was no playfulness in his affection tonight, just a sense of urgency, of worry. He went immediately to the living room, looked around, and nodded at the silent people there. Ellen was still outside, but in a moment the door opened and she returned, held tightly like a little girl, her bare legs dangling against her father's chest. Her mother was beside them. That's the end of chapter 9. In this chapter, which we're deeming a coming of age chapter, in Why Are You Lying?, we've seen Annemarie grow from a young girl into an adolescent. She wants to know more. She has her own opinions. She wants to be included in some of the adult things. And she starts to learn what it means to be brave. She starts to understand that she doesn't always have to have all the information in order to make decisions about how to behave. She's starting to see her place in society and her place in her own family. I want you to notice how Lois Lowry shows us the difference between Kirsty's age and Anne-Marie's age. While Kirsty is sent upstairs with her dolls under her arms, stomping and claiming, "It's not fair, it's not fair," Anne-Marie is allowed to be a part of the funeral proceedings. I want you to notice how Anne-Marie relates to Ellen in that moment. She judges whether or not it's best to share with Ellen what she knows, even though it's partial information. In the end, she decides to protect her friend and allows her friend to have a moment of youth, of childhood again, as her parents come back to visit. And I want you to see how Anne-Marie relates to her mother and how her rankings change. Her mother lies to her again in this chapter, but this time, both she and Anne-Marie know that she's lying. And in this shared moment, they have a shared moment of trust, a shared moment of understanding. And Anne-Marie feels that in this moment, they are equal. So in this chapter, we've seen Anne-Marie grow from a child into an adolescent. She's questioned what it means to be brave in general and what it means to be brave for her. And she's questioned how much she really needs to know in these very complicated times. Join me again for the next chapter in the next video.